Hello subscribers and what's up? Welcome back again. As I've promised you before in the previous tutorials that I will create a tutorial on how to use AsyncTask to download an image from the internet, and as you know that AsyncTask uses a background thread to download that image for you, and that method is do in background. So my idea is that whenever the user click on any item in here, the link of that image will be provided into edit text box, and when the user click on the button, that image should be downloaded by using AsyncTask. This is an edit text which I have used in here, and I set the focus label to false because whenever the app opens, so the keyboard should not automatically pop up, so it bothers you. So that's why I put the focus onto false, and I set the input type to text URI. Only the URI will be accepted inside the edit text box. This is the button which I have also handled the on click method in here. I'm going to handle its method, and that's it. So again, I have created a relative layout and I set its visibility to gone. It must not be shown in here until there is some operation going on. If there was an operation, so it will show these things, and also a progress bar. And also I have set the style of this progress bar to horizontal, which we will use this progress bar to indicate the progress of that download. And there is a list view. I set the entry of my list view, which is of array of a string. If I open the receipt folder or value, sorry about this, style and a string, created an array which is a label for this array entry values. The value for item 1 is this one, and the second item, its value is this second row, and so on. The user click on tree and nature, so this link will be get from this string file and will be put inside the edit text box. I do not want to make this video much longer, so let's go to our main activity. Let's handle these buttons. So now first I have to initialize my button length equals to, and I have to cast this to button find v by id r.id.btn download, okay, which is this button. So let's initialize the edit text now, btn link, and then we have the edit text which is this one. This is the edit text that I'm going to initialize in here, and I name it URL equals, and I have to cast this to edit text, and I use the method find view by id r.id.edit input, and then we have to initialize our relative layout equals to relative layout, and I use find view by id r.id.show layout. This is nothing but it represents this layout, and as you can see I have set its id to show. Let me minimize this one, and it's time for list view to get initialized. So first I have to initialize also the text view. Download indication equals to text view. Time for initializing my list view. List view equals to list view find view by id r.id.list image links, and then I have to initialize my string, which is this one. I have to get these data for these labels. Okay, now I'm going to take these values. So how can I do this? I have created a one-dimensional array. I will fill those values inside this length values equals, and I use the get resource method, and I use the get string array r.array.entry values, and that's it. So now it's time to handle the on click for my list view dot set on item click listener. So I'm going to create a separate variable for this in here. This private on item click listener equals new on item click list. So I have to get the method. So I have to get the selected position of that image. So by using the edit url.setText, and I get the values for those labels from this array. So I say link values. As you can see, it passed me the position of that link, and I put that position in here, and it's set. So now I have to pass that object of listener in here, and that's it. Everything is set right now. Let me just handle the on click method. So to download our image from the internet by using a background thread, I will use AsyncTask in here. I create as an inner class, private class, my AsyncTask, and it is a generic class for now. I'm going to pass void for the three parameters. The first one, which is input, and the second is progress. I also put void in here, and now I must implement doing background method. For now I have to create other methods of AsyncTask, which is on pre-execute, and another one is progress update, and another one is on post execute. Whatever you write inside the doing background, it will be done by using a separate thread, which is a background thread. Just remember that whenever you initialize AsyncTask inside the download image, it has to be executed only once, otherwise it will throw an exception. So for that reason I'm going to create separate variable of that sync. Okay, and I have to initialize this in here. My sync task equals to new my sync task, and I have to execute, and I call the execute method. So for now I have to get that the selected image URL and pass it to my async task, and the async task will give it to the doing background, and the doing background will download that image. So for that I have to get that edit text. I use the edit URL dot get text dot toString. A message and say cannot resolve method execute, because in here I set the input type to void. I have to set it to a string. Now it doesn't give me an error. For now it gives me error because the doing background is void, so I have to type it to the string because it is the input type. The async task will get the input from this parameter and will give it to the doing background to download it for you. There are a few things that you need to do. First, cast that string to URL. So I use the URL class in here, and I say URL, and now I have to initialize this to null. So now I initialize this to URL. URL doesn't have any method to parse that string to URL, so you have to create an instance of URL. Make sure that you do not write URI, because URL is a uniform resource locator and the URI uniform resource indicator. So in here I pass the params, which is an array of strings. So I will get the 0th index, which is our string. It will be cast to URL, so it gives me an exception, so I have to surround it with try and catch. So the next thing we need to do is we need to open the connection with this URL. So I use the URL and I call the open connection, and it returns me an instance of URL connection. Since we are working with HTTP URL connection, if you open the string folder, you can see it doesn't matter if you use HTTP or HTTPS. So we use the HTTP for our connection, so we need to cast that URL into HTTP URL connection. Okay, so in here I have to cast this. I have to create an instance of HTTP URL connection in here. Make sure that you do not use HTTP client connection, because the Google recommends that you use the HTTP URL connection equals, and need to cast that URL connection into HTTP URL connection. So now it gives me an error because there may arise an input output exception, and I have to add a catch clause to the end of my previous try block. So now I have to get the size of that image, because we are going to show the progress by using a progress bar or progress dialog. I'm going to create a variable in here, and I say private, and I set the type to long because it returns the size of that image into long variable, and I say image size, and I initialize this inside the on pre-execute. As I've told you before, that on pre-execute gets called before the doing background, so there you may do some initialization. So now I have the HTTP connection. By using the HTTP connection, I will get the input. HTTP connection dot get input stream. It will be a link to that source. It returns me an instance of input stream, so I have to create an input stream variable in here. Input stream, and I have to initialize this to null. The reason I have declared outside the try catch, I have to close them after the operation has finished. If you do not close these instances, you will lose resources, and there may arise a memory leakage, and your application may get crashed. And I have to put the returned instance into the input stream. That's it. So now I have to get the size of that image by using the HTTP connection dot get content length, which returns me the exact size of that image. So I will store that inside the image size variable. So now I have the input stream. I will get the image by using the input stream. You can use any loop, and in here I will use while loop. I think it is so easy and so flexible to use it here. I use the input stream, and I call the read method, and it returns me 1 byte at a time, and I will store that inside another variable, and I call read data equals to 0, and I put that return data inside the read data, and I have to put this inside bracket, and I say if it was not equals to -1, read the data 1 byte at a time and store that inside the read data. Okay, after the input stream doesn't get any input, it will return -1, and if it was equals to -1, so the loop will finish. It means the image is downloaded. I do not want to read 1 byte at a time because it will be a long operation, and I want to read 16 bytes or 20 bytes at a time. So the input.stream read method allows you to read too many bytes at a time, so that's why I'm going to create a byte variable in here, which is a byte array, and I say data equals to new byte, and I give the size of 1024 for it, and I name this as buffer, and I say input stream do not read 1 byte at a time, read 1024 bytes at a time, and I put the buffer inside this variable. When the input stream dot read, it will fill this buffer and it will return the number of elements which this input stream dot read fill this buffer. If I illustrate in here, for example, there is an A, B, C, D, and you want to download this. If you do not put the buffer in here, whenever the input stream dot read, it only read 1 byte at a time, and it will store 65 into read data, and you will do the rest of operation and then come back, and then it will read the B and it will put that inside the read data and CD. But I do not want to read 1 byte at a time. I want to read multiple bytes at a time. So that's why I put the buffer variable, buffer array in here. So now I have the data. I need to store that image inside my SD card. So I have to get a reference to my SD card. For that, I use the environment class to give me the reference to my SD card, and I call the get external storage public directory, and in here I use the environment class and I use the download method. So the environment.getExternal storage public directory will return path